process with respect to this bill, which is probably not surprising given that it is a process bill. I think it's important that when we're reforming and modernising criminal procedures, as this legislation does, we have to be really careful about some of the underlying principles against which we measure our own system of justice. And these principles have really stood the test of time, and sometimes I am concerned that there are those of us who have less of a constitutional interest in the law, we forget their importance. Mr. Speaker, I think the retirement of Sir Geoffrey Palmer as a sitting member of this House was kind of a transitional, or marked a transition in our history in that regard. With Sir Geoffrey, we actually had somebody who was incredibly adept and knowledgeable around our constitutional framework and was always alert to these matters. And that's why I'm so proud that my colleague Charles Chauvel has taken the lead role on justice matters on this side of the House. And I believe that the way that he has handled this particular matter to ensure that those principles are protected in the legislation going forward, not as reported back from the Select Committee, but by way of amendment by supplementary audit paper from the Minister, actually is something that we owe him considerable thanks for, and I want to sort of formally recognise that credit must be given where it is due. And I have in my hand 3 items of correspondence which I believe really summarise how this Parliament can do things well when you've got a Minister and you've got an opposition spokesperson who are able to work collaboratively on such issues. The first letter is dated the 8th of September this year, and it is from the office of the Honourable Simon Power, addressed to our spokesperson, Charles Chauvel. The second letter is a response from Charles Chauvel dated the 10th of September 2011, and the final letter is a response from the Minister back to Charles Chauvel, basically setting out the detail of the collaboration that has produced the result that we will deal with when we get to the committee stages of this bill. And the point that the Minister made in his letter of the 8th of September was that he advised Charles Chauvel that in fact the government had the numbers to pass the legislation, but he felt persuaded that it was important to obtain broad-based political support for such a measure, and therefore he wanted to respond to the particular issues that Charles Chauvel had raised on behalf of the Labour opposition. And I think that that is an incredibly powerful message, and one that I hope that this House takes some recognition of. I've enjoyed a similar working relationship with the Minister in his role as Minister of Commerce, and I think that this has to be the way of such measures in the future. There are a range of issues where we ought to be able to work much more collaboratively rather than leaving it to a negotiated agreement post the report back from a select committee. I think large SOPs are always fraught, as I found out with some of the financial advisors legislation when I was responsible for that. But I also think that some of the issues that Charles Chauvel has raised that he will also be introducing by way of supplementary order paper are important too, and I actually hope that the government decides to continue that whole approach on collaboration and look at some of the issues that Mr Chauvel is going to raise. And the one that I just wanted to comment on briefly was placing the judge's sentencing indication on a legislative basis. I believe it is much more preferable to have the judge's obligations in that regard to be set out in statute rather than just relying on a case-by-case situation. I have a constituent who felt forced to change his plea to guilty when the judge said he had no compunction about sending a tetraplegic man in a wheelchair to jail. The judge had made it absolutely clear that he felt that my constituent was guilty. I know the full circumstances of that case. I know that he wanted to plead not guilty and that he had every ground for pleading not guilty, but he felt he had no choice under the degree of pressure that he was placed under. I think it's important that that kind of issue is placed firmly in the legislative frame, and therefore I think that we would find less difficulties in the future. So I hope that the government does look seriously at the SOP that Mr Chevelle will put forward on behalf of the Labour opposition, and certainly on the basis of the supplementary order paper that the Minister has indicated and has now been tabled in the House, we will be supporting this bill.
Mr Speaker.
Dr Kennedy.